Hello chess buddies, welcome to Amateur Chess University. Today we'll be looking into the analysis of an amazing chess game from one of the greatest chess players of all time, Hou Yifan. This game was played in the year 2009. It was the 71st Corus Group B tournament from Wijk, Netherlands. This game features the then 14-year-old Hou Yifan, who was a Chinese chess prodigy and also became a grandmaster only few months prior to this event. Her opponent in this game was Francisco Vallejo Pons, the Spanish chess grandmaster and 5 times Spanish chess champion. He also achieved his grandmaster title at the age of 16, so he was an incredibly strong player. So without further ado, let's head straight into the game. Hou Yifan here at the white pieces and she begins with e4, going for the king's pawn opening. Francisco pushed his pawn from c7 to c5, going for the Sicilian defense. Here Hou Yifan developed her kingside knight by bringing it to f3, and Francisco developed his queenside knight by bringing it to c6, going for the old Sicilian variation. Now Yifan brought her queenside knight to c3, going for the closed traditional line of the Sicilian defense. And Francisco developed his kingside knight by bringing it to f6. Now Yifan brought her light square bishop to b5, and Francisco pushed his pawn from g7 to g6, preparing to bring his dark square bishop to g7 next. Here Yifan pushed her e4 pawn to e5, targeting the knight at f6, and Francisco moved his knight from f6 to g4, now targeting the e4 pawn twice. Here Yifan went for capturing the knight at c6 with her light square bishop, and Francisco captured this light square bishop with his d7 pawn. Now Yifan moved her h2 pawn to h3, again targeting this Francisco's knight. Here Francisco was forced to move his knight to h6. Usually white castles in this position, but Yifan preferred to move her pawn from g2 to g4, continuing with the attack. And now Francisco developed his dark square bishop to g7, going for a fianchetto line. Here Yifan pushed her d2 pawn to d3, and Francisco pushed his f7 pawn to f5. Here Yifan captured the pawn at f5 by n-passing with her e5 pawn, and Francisco captured this pawn at f6 with his e7 pawn. Now Yifan brought her queen to e2, delivering a check. Francisco could have handled this check by bringing his queen to e7, but he moved his king to f7 with an idea of bringing his rook from h8 to e8 next. And Yifan was pretty aware of this, so she moved her dark square bishop from c1 to e3. Now Francisco moved his rook from h8 to e8, and Yifan castled on the queen side. Here Francisco moved his king from f7 to g8 to a more safer square, and now Yifan moved her pawn from d3 to d4. Here Francisco captured this pawn on d4 with his c5 pawn, and Yifan captured this pawn on d4 with her knight at f3. With both Yifan's rook and Francisco's queen on the same d file, Yifan had plenty of options to attack the queen if she moves her knight from the d4 square. So here Francisco moved his queen from d8 to c7, and now Yifan developed a rather rook from h1 to e1. Her next preparation was to bring the queen to c4. Here Francisco brought his knight from h6 to f7, and Yifan moved her queen from e2 to c4, now targeting this king on the diagonal. Here Francisco brought his queen from c7 to h2, now targeting the h3 pawn, and Yifan moved her knight from c3 to e2. Now Francisco captured this pawn on h3 with his queen, and Yifan moved her knight from e2 to f4, now targeting the queen at h3. Here Francisco captured another pawn on g4 with his queen, and Yifan moved her rook from e1 to g1, attacking the queen. This forced Francisco to move his queen back to d7, and Yifan continued to attack. She moved her knight from d4 to e6, now opening up this d file for a rook to attack the queen on d7. Here Francisco was forced to move his queen to e7, the only square available, and Yifan captured the dark square bishop on g7 with her knight, and Francisco captured this knight at g7 with his king. Now Yifan continued to pile up the pressure. She brought her knight from f4 to g5, delivering a check. And since the g6 pawn is pinned due to the rook at g1 targeting the king, it cannot capture the knight at h5. Here Francisco had to move his king back to h8, and Yifan brought her dark square bishop to c5, again continuing to attack the queen of Francisco. Now Francisco moved his queen from e7 to e6, asking for the queen exchange. Yifan didn't go for the queen exchange in this position because it would have been beneficial for black. If she captured the queen at e6, then Francisco would have captured this queen at e6 with his rook at e8, and with her knight at h5 under attack from this g6 pawn. Yifan would have forced to move her knight back to g3, and then Francisco would have pushed his pawn from b7 to b6, and it will be black which is attacking, and Yifan would have completely went on the back foot. So after queen to e6, Yifan produced another brilliant move. She brought her rook from g1 to e1, and now the situation is extremely complex for black. Even if Francisco wanted to go for a queen exchange, he can't. Because if he captured the queen at c4, then Yifan would have ended the game by capturing the rook at e8, delivering a checkmate. So after this brilliant rook to e1 move from Yifan, Francisco was forced to capture this rook at e1 with his queen. Here most players playing with the white pieces would capture the queen with their rook, but Yifan had an even better idea. She captured the knight at f7 with her queen. This was such a brilliant attacking strategy from Yifan. Just look at this position. The knight, the queen, as well as the dark square bishop are controlling all the squares with the king pushed to the corner on h8. Here Francisco should have captured the knight on h5 by sacrificing his queen at e1, but he decided to capture the rook at d1 with his queen at e1, now giving a check, and here Yifan captured the queen at d1 with her king. With the queen to g7 checkmate move looming in the next step, Francisco was under all sorts of pressure, and in desperation he brought out his light square bishop to g4, now delivering a check to the king, and here Yifan moved her king to d2. Here Francisco brought his rook from a8 to d8, again delivering a check, and Yifan moved her queen from d2 to c3. With no more possibility of further checks, Francisco captured this knight at h5 with his light square bishop, and in this position on move number 30, Yifan came up with the winning idea. So feel free to pause the video and try to figure out the move Yifan played next. If you are able to figure it out, well done. If you think capturing this pawn at f6 with the queen was that move, well, you are not far off. But this is not the winning idea. Most players would prefer to capture this pawn with their queen. But here Yifan had another brilliant move in her arsenal. She brought her dark square bishop to d4, now targeting this pawn at f5. Now Francisco had no other option but to capture this dark square bishop, this rook at d8. Now Francisco's rook at e8 had no support, and here Yifan captured this rook at e8 with her queen, delivering a check. And it was in this position on move 31 that Francisco resigned the game. So let's see why. After the check from queen, the only place Francisco can move his king was to g7, and in the next step, Yifan will pick up the rook on d4 with her king, and this will lead to a battle between the queen and the light square bishop, and Yifan will win this match comfortably. So that's the game. Yifan in an interview had mentioned that this is her favorite and the best game she has played so far. There is no doubt why she felt that way. Up against an extremely difficult opponent, she kept churning out her best moves. It was pretty evident that at the age of 14 itself, that Yifan was destined for greater times ahead, and she went on to accomplish them. If you have any thoughts on the game, feel free to share below. Thank you for watching. Take care. See you.